The ADX Florence, Colorado Supermax, the quietest door in America. The door closes with a sound most people would never notice. Not a slam, not a crash, not even an echo, just a soft metal click. Controlled, deliberate, final. Inside America's most secure federal prison, that sound means something very specific. It means the outside world is gone. No voices, no footsteps, no sunlight across a window, no human presence within reach. Just concrete, steel, and time. This is ADX Florence, a place many correctional officers quietly call the quietest prison in America. Located in the high desert of southern Colorado, surrounded by mountains and open land, it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There are no towering medieval walls, no dramatic watchtowers like in the movies, just low, flat buildings sitting under an enormous sky. Simple, still, unassuming. But inside, it is one of the most restrictive correctional environments ever built in the United States. Here, silence is not accidental. It is engineered, designed, maintained. Every hallway dampens sound. Every door seals tight. Every cell separates one human being from every other. For many incarcerated there, days pass with almost no direct conversation. Hours blur together under constant artificial light. Time slows. Thoughts get louder. Because when everything else disappears, your own mind is the only thing left. And tonight, according to internal reports and later investigations, something inside this controlled, predictable environment didn't add up. A detail, a discrepancy, a moment that shouldn't have happened. In a place built on certainty. Because in a prison where every movement is logged, every door recorded, every second monitored, even a small inconsistency feels enormous. Before alarms, before questions, before reports, there was only a quiet hallway, and one officer walking his morning rounds. The morning check, long before sunrise, ADX Florence runs on routine. Routine is safety. Routine is control. Routine is how order survives inside a maximum security facility. The same checks, the same counts, the same procedures. Every day, every shift, a correctional officer walks down the corridor, boots steady against the polished concrete. Not fast, not slow, measured. The lights overhead never turn off completely. There is no real night here, just a dimmer version of day. The air feels still, almost heavy. Doors line both sides of the hallway. Solid steel, small observation windows. Food slots near waist height. Behind each door, one person. Separated. Alone. This level of separation isn't theatrical. It's procedural. ADX houses individuals considered high risk for communication, coordination, or violence inside traditional prisons. The design removes opportunity. No group spaces. No shared cells. Minimal contact. Everything controlled. The officer checks each door. Looks through the slot. Confirms presence. Marks it down. Routine. Then he reaches one cell. He looks inside. And pauses. The bed is neatly made. The sink is dry. The small concrete desk untouched. No movement. No figure. Just an empty space where someone should be. At first, he assumes a transfer. Medical, maybe. Administrative. But there's no notation. No escort record. No scheduled movement. Which means one thing. This doesn't make sense. In a place built so precisely that even a missed meal is documented, an unrecorded absence is not small. It's impossible. And impossible things don't belong in Supermax. Before the alarms sound, before supervisors arrive, the story pulls backward. Because to understand why this moment matters, you have to understand what this place was built to be. Why ADX exists. ADX Florence wasn't built out of ambition. It was built out of fear. In the 1970s and 80s, the federal prison system faced a growing problem. Some incarcerated individuals continued organizing crimes from inside prison walls. Some led gangs. Some coordinated violence. Some targeted staff. Traditional facilities weren't designed for that level of risk. Then came several high-profile incidents that shook confidence in the system. Correctional officers were harmed. Control was questioned. Administrators realized something uncomfortable. Not every prison could hold every prisoner safely. So the government made a decision. If certain individuals could not safely exist within normal prison populations, a new kind of facility would be created. Not larger, not harsher, but tighter, more controlled, more isolating. In the early 1990s, construction began outside Florence, Colorado. Remote, dry, quiet. Far from major cities, the idea was simple: limit movement, limit contact, limit communication, and you limit risk. When ADX opened in 1994, it introduced one of the most restrictive housing models in the country. Single cells, concrete furnishings, highly monitored schedules, up to 23 hours a day spent alone. It wasn't theatrical punishment. It was logistical control. Every design choice had one purpose: predictability. Because predictability means safety. Or at least, that was the theory. Life inside silence. Inside an ADX cell, life becomes smaller, measured, minimal. A bed molded from concrete. A desk that cannot be moved. A narrow window angled toward the sky. You don't see the mountains. You don't see the horizon. You see light. And that's all. Meals arrive through a slot. Recreation happens alone. Showers are scheduled and monitored. Contact with other people is limited and controlled. For some, the quiet becomes routine. For others, it becomes overwhelming. Psychologists have long studied the effects of prolonged isolation. Without regular social interaction, the brain changes how it processes time and stress. Some people adapt through structure: reading, writing, exercise, mental routines. Others struggle. Sleep patterns shift. Thoughts repeat. Silence becomes louder than noise. Staff know this. That's why medical and mental health checks are standard. Because even in the most secure environment, human beings are still human beings. And humans aren't built for endless quiet. Yet despite everything designed to prevent connection, something small began to happen. Something almost invisible. Something easy to dismiss. A sound. 3 taps. Pause. 3 more. At the same time each day. Quiet. Barely audible. But consistent. At first, it seemed meaningless. Pipes settle. Metal expands. Buildings make noise. But then, someone tapped back. The language of walls. Sound travels in strange ways. Through vents. Through pipes. Through hairline gaps in concrete. Even in a facility designed to suppress communication, physics still exists. And humans are remarkably creative. Historically, tapping has been used in prisons for centuries. Simple codes. Letters. Numbers. Ways to say I'm here. Ways to say you're not alone. Not to plan anything. Not to organize anything. Just to prove another mind exists nearby. Inside deep isolation, that matters. Reports later suggested small, irregular tapping patterns had been noticed by multiple staff members. Nothing organized. Nothing dangerous. Just human instinct pushing back against silence. But administrators take communication seriously. Because communication creates unpredictability. And unpredictability is what Supermax was designed to prevent. Then something unusual happened. Several prisoners declined meals on the same day. Not in protest. Not coordinated, as far as anyone could prove. Just a pattern. Separate wings. Separate individuals. Same timing. Medical teams checked on them. Staff documented everything. Then, the tapping stopped. All of it. Every wing. Total quiet. And for about 30 seconds, camera feeds flickered. 30 seconds isn't long. But inside a place where every second is logged, 30 seconds feels enormous. The investigation begins. Back in the present, alarms break the silence. Controlled. Procedural. Not chaos. Because chaos is the one thing ADX never allows. Units lock down. Counts begin. Supervisors arrive. Logs are reviewed. Cameras checked. Doors inspected. Every system cross-referenced. Because the first rule of maximum security is simple: assume nothing. Verify everything. The missing prisoner isn't treated like an escape. Because escape, from this design, is extraordinarily unlikely. Instead, investigators look for clerical errors, transfers, medical holds, recording mistakes, data mismatches, something explainable, something ordinary. But as records are reviewed, questions multiply. And inside the cell, officers notice something small carved lightly into the concrete wall. Not deep, not dramatic, just 3 short marks, close together, like taps. And beneath them, scratched carefully, one word. Listen. Not a threat, not a message of harm, just a word, a reminder, or maybe a request. Listen, because sometimes the most important things inside places like this aren't loud. They're quiet. So quiet they almost disappear. And maybe that's the point. ADX Florence was built to control sound, control movement, control risk. But no structure is perfect. No system is absolute. And sometimes, the smallest inconsistencies force the biggest questions. Not about escape, not about conspiracy, but about something simpler. What happens to people when silence becomes their entire world? And what stories exist inside that silence that no one outside ever hears? Lockdown. The alarms did not stop for hours. Not loud enough to cause panic. Not chaotic, but constant, controlled, relentless. Inside ADX Florence, alarms aren't meant to frighten. They're meant to signal one thing. Procedure. Doors sealed one by one. Steel sliding into place. Heavy locks engaging. Wing after wing closing like compartments on a submarine. If something goes wrong here, the prison doesn't react emotionally. It reacts mechanically. Sections isolate. Movement stops. Silence returns. Within minutes, the facility becomes what officers sometimes describe as a box inside a box. Nothing moves without authorization. Nothing opens without confirmation. Guards line the corridors shoulder to shoulder. Not rushing. Not shouting. Just watching. Because uncertainty is the one thing this place was designed to eliminate. And now, uncertainty was everywhere. A single inconsistency had triggered a full lockdown. One cell. One count. One person who should be there, but wasn't. In most prisons, that might mean a paperwork error, a medical visit, a temporary transfer. But ADX Florence doesn't operate on maybes. Here, every second of a person's day is documented. Every escort logged. Every door electronically tracked. There is no wandering. There is no improvising. Which meant this wasn't just unusual. It was impossible. And impossible things make systems nervous. Because if something impossible happened once, what else could be happening that no one noticed? The federal response. By late afternoon, the prison wasn't just a correctional facility anymore. It was an investigation site. Unmarked vehicles rolled through the gates. Federal agents stepped out carrying briefcases and folders. Notepads, evidence kits, printed logs. They didn't wear standard prison uniforms. They didn't joke with staff. They didn't linger. They went straight to work. Because when something doesn't add up inside a Supermax facility, the response is immediate. Every guard was interviewed. Every supervisor questioned. Where were you? Who did you see? What time did you check? Did anything seem unusual? No assumptions. No shortcuts. Camera servers were copied. Digital records duplicated. Backups secured. If there was an answer, it would be somewhere in the data. It had to be. ADX Florence was built on one core belief. If you watch closely enough, nothing can surprise you. And yet here they were. Surprised. Because one fact refused to change. A man assigned to a cell was no longer in that cell. And there was no clean explanation for why. The empty cell, the cell itself, became evidence. Investigators treated it like a crime scene. Photographs, measurements, notes, every inch examined. The walls were poured concrete, not panels, not blocks, solid. The bed wasn't bolted down. It was molded directly into the structure. Same with the desk. Same with the shelf. Even the sink was integrated. Nothing loose. Nothing removable. Nothing that could be turned into a tool. The vent was narrow. Too small for anything larger than airflow. The door showed no scratches. No tampering. The locking mechanism tested perfectly. The camera lens above the door blinked steadily. Functional. Uninterrupted. On paper, this room was exactly what it was designed to be. Escape-proof. Which left investigators with a problem. Because if the structure hadn't failed, then either the records had failed or something else had been misunderstood entirely. Then one agent noticed something subtle. The concrete near the back wall looked different. Not broken. Not damaged. Just smoother. Like a patch of floor worn down by repeated standing. As if someone had spent hours there. Every day, facing the wall. Waiting. Listening. Reviewing the footage, they pulled weeks of camera footage. Then months. ADX never stops recording. Every cell has eyes. Every corridor documented. If anything happened, it should be there. At first glance, everything looked routine. The prisoner followed schedule. Meals delivered. Lights out. Exercise periods. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suspicious. Just the slow rhythm of isolated life. Then an analyst slowed the footage. Frame by frame. The prisoner often stood in the same place. Back to the camera. Facing the wall. Hands low at his sides. Still. For long stretches. Too still. So they zoomed in. Enhanced. Adjusted contrast. And that's when they saw it. Movement. Small. Almost invisible. His fingers. Tapping lightly against the concrete. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps again. Not restless. Not random. Deliberate. The room grew quiet. Because that pattern meant something. It meant communication. And communication wasn't supposed to exist here at all. The sound problem. ADX Florence was engineered to suppress sound. Thick walls, spaced cells, absorbing materials. Architects believed voices couldn't travel far enough to matter. But physics doesn't disappear just because a design hopes it will. Sound doesn't only travel through air. It travels through solids, through pipes, through vents, through metal, through water lines. And the human brain is remarkable at recognizing patterns, especially when silence dominates your life. When you live alone long enough, you start to hear everything. Footsteps 3 cells away, a cough down the tier, the hum of a light, even the faintest vibration, a tap, then another. For most people, it would be nothing. For someone in near total isolation, it could mean someone else exists. And sometimes, that's enough. Investigators checked more footage, other wings, other units, more prisoners standing close to walls, heads tilted, listening, waiting, then tapping back. Different patterns, different rhythms. Slow, careful, but undeniably intentional. The silence wasn't empty. It was active. A language forms. Historically, prisons have always had secret languages. Knocks, codes, simple alphabets tapped through walls. Ways to say yes, ways to say no, ways to say I'm still here. Not plans, not conspiracies, just connection. Because humans will always try to connect, even when everything around them says they shouldn't. Over time, investigators realized the tapping wasn't random. It followed structure. Short sequences, pauses, repeats, like letters or numbers. It would take patience, months, maybe years. But inside a place where time barely moves, patience is something people have plenty of. The design of ADX had prevented shouting, prevented gathering, prevented passing notes. But it hadn't prevented vibration. And vibration was enough. The system had been watching constantly, but it hadn't been listening. Staff under the microscope. Attention turned to the staff. Not because anyone suspected wrongdoing, but because procedure demanded it. Background checks were reviewed again. Shift assignments analyzed. Who escorted whom? Who worked nights? Who worked certain wings more often? Patterns. Correlations. Anything unusual. One officer's name appeared repeatedly on routine logs connected to the missing prisoner. Not suspicious, just frequent. He had done his job, followed protocol, filed paperwork, clocked in, clocked out. Nothing dramatic, which, strangely, made investigators look closer. Because when everything else looks strange, normality stands out. He was interviewed. Calm, direct, professional. He denied hearing tapping, denied any special contact, denied breaking rules. And there was no proof he had. No missing keys, no altered logs, no blind spots. But he did say something simple, something that stayed with investigators. He said, sometimes they just want someone to hear them. Not help, not favors, just to be heard. Inside a place built entirely around silence, that sentence carried weight. The bigger question, days turned into weeks. No clear explanation emerged. No dramatic discovery. No cinematic answer. Just paperwork, interviews, and questions. Then another incident report surfaced. A prisoner had written something on his wall. Not threatening, not violent. Just a sentence scratched lightly into the paint. We are not alone. Medical staff noted stress, fatigue, isolation effects. Nothing criminal, nothing coordinated. But it reinforced the same idea investigators were slowly realizing. ADX Florence had mastered control. It had mastered surveillance. It had mastered isolation. But it had overlooked something fundamental. Human beings adapt. Even in silence. Even in concrete boxes. They find ways to signal. Ways to listen. Ways to remind each other they still exist. And maybe the real mystery wasn't how someone disappeared. Maybe it was something quieter. Something simpler. How much had been happening inside those walls that no one ever thought to hear? Because sometimes a system can watch every second and still miss the most important part. The sound of someone tapping, waiting, hoping that somewhere, someone is listening. The lights never go out. Inside ADX Florence, the lights never turn off. Not fully. Not ever. There is no sunrise through a window. No sunset across the wall. Day and night blur together into one long, unbroken stretch of artificial light. Morning looks like midnight. Midnight looks like noon. Time doesn't feel like it's moving forward. It just sits there, heavy, still, watching. For the men inside, clocks lose meaning. Days are measured by routine instead of hours. Meals, counts, checks, footsteps in the hallway, the soft slide of food trays through steel doors. That's how you tell time here. Not by sunlight, but by procedure. After the discrepancy, the missing inmate count, something shifted. Not officially, not on paper, no memo, no announcement, but everyone felt it. Guards spoke a little softer. Doors seemed to close a little slower. Conversations stopped when someone new entered the room, because a thought had entered the building that wasn't supposed to exist. If one man could somehow slip through the system's awareness, then maybe the system wasn't as perfect as everyone believed. And in a place built entirely on certainty, doubt spreads fast. Names are replaced by numbers. It's efficient, but during an investigation, numbers turn back into people. Files are reopened. Histories reviewed. Photographs studied again. The missing inmate had been transferred in years earlier. Mid-40s. Quiet. No record of disciplinary problems. No assaults. No dramatic incidents. Nothing that would normally attract attention. The kind of prisoner staff sometimes describe as easy to manage. The kind who follows instructions, keeps his head down, doesn't complain, doesn't ask for much. The kind you don't remember clearly after your shift ends. Which, investigators realized, might be exactly why he mattered. Because the loud ones draw attention. The quiet ones observe. And observers learn things other people miss. The pattern reader, his earlier psychological evaluations revealed something subtle. Notes written years apart. Different facilities. Different doctors. But similar language. Patient. Reserved. Highly observant. Memorizes routines. One line stood out. Subject appears to study his environment closely before acting. Study his environment. Inside ADX Florence, the environment is almost entirely predictable. Lights at the same time. Meals at the same minute. Security checks at fixed intervals. Doors opening. Doors closing. The rhythm rarely changes. And when something repeats long enough, it becomes measurable. When it becomes measurable, it becomes predictable. And when something is predictable, it sometimes reveals gaps. Not dramatic ones. Not obvious ones. But small spaces where timing isn't perfect. Where systems overlap. Where attention shifts. Tiny imperfections in an otherwise controlled machine. Most people would never notice. But someone with nothing except time? They might notice everything. Reconstructing the week. Investigators reconstructed his final week inside the unit. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because nothing did. They watched hours of footage. Then days. Then the entire week. It looked ordinary. Routine. Boring. Exactly how ADX life is supposed to look. He ate. He slept. He stood. He paced. He complied. But when you slow life down, tiny things become visible. On one day, he stood near the back wall longer than usual. On another, he left part of his meal untouched. Not refusing it, just distracted. On another, he adjusted his blanket carefully, almost precisely, as if aligning something. And once, briefly, the camera feed stuttered. A momentary glitch, barely noticeable. A blink in the system. 2 seconds of static before returning to normal. In most places, 2 seconds mean nothing. In a facility built on constant monitoring, 2 seconds feel enormous. Not proof of anything, just a question mark. And questions are what investigators collect. The architecture of silence. ADX Florence was engineered with one philosophy above all. Separation equals control. Cells spaced apart. Limited sightlines. Minimal shared space. Architects believed that if people couldn't see or hear each other, they couldn't organize. But architecture has limits. Sound doesn't only travel through air. It travels through structure, through pipes, through vents, through reinforced concrete itself. And when someone spends years in near total quiet, their senses adapt. They notice vibrations most people would ignore. A footstep, a door latch, a distant cough, or a faint knock. Investigators began noticing a pattern across multiple recordings. Different inmates, different wings, standing close to walls, heads slightly tilted, listening. Then small movements of their hands. Light taps, barely visible, not dramatic, not frantic, slow, measured, like someone speaking carefully. The silence, it turned out, wasn't empty at all. It was full of signals, too quiet for most people to hear. But not for the people who lived there. Rumors and uncertainty. Among staff, rumors began circulating. Quiet ones, the kind exchanged near coffee machines, or in low voices during shift changes. Nothing official, Just speculation. Maybe the count had been logged incorrectly. Maybe paperwork lagged behind a transfer. Maybe there was a technical explanation no one had found yet. But there were other theories too, less comfortable ones. What if communication had existed longer than anyone realized? What if inmates understood the building better than staff did? What if the system wasn't as airtight as everyone assumed? No one said those ideas loudly, because this place depended on confidence. And confidence doesn't survive doubt very well. Searching the forgotten spaces, maintenance teams were asked to review rarely accessed areas. Utility corridors, storage rooms, old access points from early construction, places not regularly patrolled because nothing important was supposed to happen there. Dust covered most of it. Unused pipes, sealed panels, long, quiet stretches of concrete. Nothing dramatic turned up, just ordinary signs of age. But investigators noted something interesting. In one narrow pipe channel, faint scratch marks appeared. Not damage, not vandalism, just tiny etchings. Letters, dates, short words, old, accumulated slowly over years. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't instructions. It looked more like a record. Proof that someone had once been there. Proof that someone wanted to leave a mark. In a place designed to erase marks entirely. A quiet reminder of something simple. Even in isolation, people try to be remembered. The psychological shift. By now, the investigation had changed tone. It wasn't just about one missing inmate. It was about something broader. Something psychological. ADX Florence had been designed under the assumption that isolation weakens people. And for many, it does. Some struggle. Some withdraw. Some lose track of time. But investigators began to consider another possibility. For a small number of individuals, isolation doesn't dull the senses. It sharpens them. When distractions disappear, attention grows. When noise fades, tiny sounds stand out. When nothing changes, patterns become obvious. The facility believed it was constantly watching the inmates. But maybe, in their own way, the inmates had been watching back. Listening, counting, learning the rhythms of the place. Not to cause chaos, not to break rules, but simply because the human brain refuses to sit idle forever. It studies, it adapts, it survives. The lingering question. In the end, investigators didn't announce a dramatic conclusion. No cinematic discovery. No sensational explanation. Just reports, data, interviews, and a handful of unanswered questions. The inmate's location remained officially unresolved. The tapping remained unofficial, unproven, difficult to quantify, but impossible to ignore. And that uncertainty lingered, because ADX Florence was built to eliminate uncertainty completely. Yet now, every guard walking those corridors carried the same quiet thought. Maybe control isn't absolute. Maybe silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. Maybe it just means you're not hearing it. The lights kept shining. The cameras kept recording. Doors kept locking on schedule. Everything looked exactly the same as before. But the feeling was different. Because once you realize a system has blind spots, you start seeing shadows everywhere. And inside a place built on silence, sometimes the most important sounds are the ones you almost miss. A faint tap, a pause, another tap. Someone, somewhere, still listening, still counting, still waiting for the system to blink again. 2:17 a.m. At 2:17 in the morning, ADX Florence feels different. Not louder, not quieter, just heavier. Air moves slowly through the ventilation shafts, like lungs filling and emptying. Metal pipes tick as temperatures change. Somewhere far away, boots echo against concrete. Then nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. Inside most prisons, nights are restless. Voices, movement, noise. But here, nothing. Because ADX Florence was designed to erase sound, to erase contact, to erase connection. Yet lately, the quiet hasn't felt empty. It feels crowded. Like the building itself is listening. Like something unseen is awake inside the walls. After the disappearance, guards began noticing it. The way hallways seemed longer. The way cameras felt less like tools, and more like eyes. Watching, waiting. Because now there was one thought nobody could ignore. If one man could vanish from the most secure prison in America, then maybe this place wasn't as controlled as everyone believed. Maybe the system wasn't perfect. Maybe it never had been. And somewhere inside all that concrete, there was a flaw, a gap. The note, the discovery under the bed changed everything. A small piece of paper. Old, fragile, folded tight. Paper wasn't supposed to exist here. Every item was tracked, counted, confiscated. But this one survived, hidden for years inside a hollow concrete base. When investigators opened it, they didn't find a plea. No fear, no apology, just 2 sentences. Calm, precise. Count the seconds between the checks. Every system has a gap. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't desperate. It read like instructions, like engineering notes. And that was what frightened investigators most. Because desperate people rush. Desperate people make mistakes. But patient people? They plan. They measure. They wait. And patience is far more dangerous, especially in a place built entirely on routine. ADX Florence runs on clocks, meals, lights, movements, everything timed, everything predictable, and predictability can be studied. The timing test, supervisors ordered something that had never been done before. A second-by-second review of guard patrols. Not reports, not summaries. Raw time, stopwatches, clipboards, observation logs. Every hallway, every shift, every night. On paper, guards checked cells every 30 minutes. Exactly 30. But humans aren't machines. One round might take 28. Another 32. Sometimes longer. A question from another officer. A stuck door. Paperwork. Tiny delays. Harmless on their own. But when stacked together, they form something unexpected. Small holes. Moments when nobody was watching. Moments that weren't supposed to exist. And then they found it. 2:17 a.m. to 2:19. Every single night. One guard finished his round. The next hadn't started yet. 2 full minutes. The hallway sat empty. Unobserved. Unprotected. For years. Because nothing had ever happened before. Until now. And right in the middle of that hallway sat the missing prisoner's cell. 2 minutes. Every night. A perfect window. The hollow sound. At first, the discovery didn't make sense. 2 minutes wasn't enough time to break a door, or smash concrete, or disappear, unless the escape wasn't about breaking anything, unless it was about using something already there. Engineers brought ground scanners. Slow passes across the floor. Beep, beep, beep. Then one tone changed. Lower, hollow, different. They stopped. Right at the corner of the cell. The same spot where the prisoner had stood every day. Facing the wall. Tapping. Listening. Waiting. A drill bit touched the surface. Concrete dust rose into the air. Then suddenly, the bit dropped. Just slightly. Space underneath. Not a tunnel. Not a hole. But a gap. An old crawl space sealed decades earlier during construction. Supposed to be unreachable. Forgotten. Ignored. But the concrete above it? Thinner than expected. Old. Worn. Weak. And slowly, over years, it had been scraped. Grain by grain. Patience. Investigators stared at the bent spoon found weeks earlier. At first, it seemed meaningless. Not sharp. Not useful. But now it made sense. It wasn't for digging. It was for grinding. Scraping. Dust. Tiny amounts. Night after night. Imagine removing only a teaspoon of concrete each day. Almost nothing. Invisible. But over 5 years? Over 10? You don't need force. You need time. And ADX Florence gives prisoners one thing in endless supply. Time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to memorize. Time to wear down even stone. This wasn't an escape attempt. It was erosion. Patience weaponized. The slowest tunnel ever made. So slow no one thought to look for it. Because nobody expects someone to spend years preparing for 2 minutes. But someone did. The path. Small robots were sent into the crawl space. Cameras crawled through dust and old cables. Rust. Pipes. Darkness untouched for decades. Then, fabric. A strip of cloth tied around a pipe. Then another. Directions. Like breadcrumbs. Someone had mapped this place. Memorized turns. Marked lefts and rights. This wasn't wandering. It was navigation. And the path led somewhere unexpected. A sealed service hatch. Rusty. Scratched. Used. Behind it. A storage room. No cameras. No sensors. Because modern blueprints didn't even show it existed. It had been forgotten. Until now. From that room. A maintenance corridor. And that corridor led straight to the laundry loading area, where trucks came and went every day. Uninspected. Routine. Boring. Invisible. The perfect cover. Because sometimes the easiest escape isn't breaking out. It's blending in. The realization, truck logs were reviewed. One departure stood out. 5 minutes early. Nothing dramatic. Nothing suspicious. Exactly the kind of thing no one questions. Laundry bins were huge, designed for sheets. Uniforms, bulk loads, large enough to hide inside, large enough for someone patient, someone calm, someone who knew exactly when no one would look. And suddenly the pieces connected. Years of tapping, sharing information, mapping walls, counting seconds, testing gaps, scraping concrete, marking tunnels, waiting, all for one moment, one chance, one quiet morning. And it worked, not because the prison was weak, but because the system was predictable. And predictability is vulnerability. The network remains, but one question remained. This couldn't be one man. Mapping a prison takes more than one perspective. Different wings, different angles, different information, which meant cooperation, communication, a network. And that was the most unsettling truth of all. Isolation hadn't erased connection. It had forced it to evolve, tap by tap, wall to wall, year after year. A hidden language, a silent classroom, teaching only one lesson: patience. Later, another bed was lifted in a different wing. Underneath, the same scrape marks. Another hole started, not finished, but started. Proof. This wasn't an escape. It was a blueprint, something being passed along, quietly, methodically, like knowledge. Because even inside the most controlled place in America, humans still adapt, still think, still plan. That night, patrols doubled, schedules tightened, gaps eliminated. The system hardened. But something had changed. Because now every guard understood something they had never considered before. They weren't just watching prisoners. Sometimes, the prisoners were watching them. And somewhere down a dark hallway, soft, slow, deliberate, a sound returned. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Then 3 more. The language still alive, still moving, still counting, waiting for the next gap, waiting for the next chance. Because even the strongest walls have seams, and someone is always listening for them. The flicker. At 3:04 in the morning, the control room lights flickered. Just once. So fast most people wouldn't notice. A blink. Then everything returned to normal. Monitors steady. Indicators green. Systems online. No alarms. No alerts. On paper, nothing happened. But inside ADX Florence, nothing ever just happens. This is a facility engineered for consistency. Power redundancies. Backup generators. Layered safeguards. Designed so that even storms, outages, or technical faults cannot interrupt surveillance. So when a light flickers here, it isn't random. It's suspicious. The senior officer on duty didn't speak, didn't move, didn't even breathe for several seconds. Because in a place built on total control, a tiny anomaly feels enormous. One flicker means one question. What else blinked that no one saw? In maximum security environments, gaps aren't measured in minutes. They're measured in fractions of seconds. And sometimes, that's enough. Camera C17, 3 minutes later, a soft chime sounded. Not a siren, not urgent, just a quiet notification. The kind that usually signals something minor. A temperature change, a sensor delay, a door not fully sealed. Routine, forgettable. But tonight, routine felt different. The officer pulled up camera C17, range 13, isolation wing, the quietest corridor in the prison. Here, inmates spend nearly all day alone. Minimal movement, minimal contact, minimal sound. The screen showed exactly what you'd expect. Gray walls, steel doors, still air, nothing. Then something shifted. Not a person, not a shadow, something small, sliding slowly across the floor, almost weightless. The footage rewound. Played again. There it was. A folded piece of paper, pushed carefully through a food slot, moving inch by inch, toward the wall, toward somewhere unseen. Inside ADX Florence, paper isn't just trash. Paper means writing. Writing means messages. And messages mean communication. In a facility designed to eliminate communication. That matters. A lot. The message. A response team moved down the corridor. Footsteps echoed. Keys rattled. Radios murmured. Every sound amplified by concrete. The paper still lay on the floor. An officer picked it up carefully, wearing gloves. Unfolded it slowly. Everyone leaned closer, expecting anger, threats, demands. Instead, 3 calm words, neatly written. Tonight is ready. That was all. No signature. No explanation. Just certainty. Not emotional. Not frantic. Matter of fact. As if announcing the weather. And somehow, that was more unsettling than anything else. Because it suggested planning, preparation, confidence. It suggested whoever wrote it believed something had already been set in motion. Not starting tonight. Finishing tonight. The quiet inmate. The message was traced to a single cell. Inside sat an older inmate. Quiet record. No incidents. No disciplinary history. The kind of person staff rarely think about. He wasn't pacing. Wasn't nervous. He simply sat. Hands folded. Eyes steady. Calm. Too calm. When officers entered, he didn't react. Didn't ask questions. Didn't protest. Just slowly turned his head. And smiled. Not wildly. Not strangely. Just peacefully. Like someone who already knew something others didn't. Investigators would later describe that moment as deeply unsettling. Because fear is predictable. Anger is predictable. But calm certainty? That's harder to explain. That suggests planning. And planning suggests coordination. Patterns emerge. The search expanded. One cell. Then two. Then an entire wing. What they found wasn't dramatic. No tunnels. No broken doors. No chaos. Just small signs. Loose concrete. Fine dust and cracks. Tiny improvised scraping tools. Folded notes. Fragments of schedules. Observations. Timings. Notebooks of patience. It didn't look like an escape attempt. It looked like research. Like engineering. Like people studying a system over years. Testing it. Learning it. Understanding it. Because ADX Florence runs on patterns. And patterns can be measured. And measured systems can be predicted. By sunrise, 12 cells showed early signs of floor weakening. Not holes. Preparations. Seeds planted quietly underground. Waiting. For the right moment. 8 years. An emergency meeting filled the administrative conference room. Coffee untouched. Faces pale. No one joked. No one relaxed. An engineer reviewed the findings. Concrete samples. Were patterns. Age estimates. Then he said something that silenced the room. Some of these sections may be 8 years old. 8 years. 8 years of slow, careful preparation. Right under everyone's feet. Without detection. That wasn't recklessness. That wasn't desperation. That was discipline. The kind of discipline you only get when someone has nothing but time. ADX Florence was built to isolate. But isolation has an unexpected side effect. It gives people space to think, to observe, to plan. And sometimes, that can be more powerful than strength. The system tightens. The response was immediate. Patrols doubled, then tripled. Shift overlaps removed timing gaps. Every hallway monitored continuously. No seconds unobserved. On paper, it was airtight. Perfect coverage. A system without cracks. Or so it seemed. But later that night, the tapping returned. Soft at first, then spreading. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, tap, tap. Not random. Not angry. Rhythmic. Structured. Like coded signals. Like a language. Officers pounded on doors, demanding silence. The sound stopped, then started again somewhere else. Then farther down the wing. Moving. Traveling. As if the walls themselves were passing messages. The building didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt alive. When silence breaks, then the lights flickered again. Longer this time. Camera feeds froze. Returned. Skipped frames. Tiny gaps. Milliseconds missing. Technicians blamed lag. System overload. Routine glitches. But to the officers watching, it felt familiar. Like before. Like the same kind of blink that preceded the first disappearance. Down one corridor, a guard realized something unsettling. For a brief moment, he was alone. No overlapping patrol. No radio response. Just silence. Absolute silence. He checked doors. Faces watched from inside. Calm. Observing. Waiting. At one cell, the bed was neatly folded. The floor slightly disturbed. But the occupant was gone. No damage. No struggle. Just absence. A reminder of the same chilling truth discovered earlier. Sometimes escapes don't look like chaos. Sometimes they look like nothing at all. Just a system missing a few seconds. Just a plan unfolding quietly. Just patience finally reaching its moment. By dawn, investigations intensified. Perimeters searched. Procedures tightened. Reviews launched. Because whether or not anyone truly made it beyond the facility that night, one thing was undeniable. The silence had broken. The illusion of total control had cracked. ADX Florence was still secure. Still one of the most fortified prisons in the world. But the staff now understood something important. Isolation doesn't erase intelligence. Walls don't stop thinking. And time Time is the one tool you can't confiscate. Somewhere behind concrete and steel, someone was still counting seconds, still studying patterns, still waiting for another gap. Because even the strongest system ever built is still built by humans. And humans always leave seams.